We did sort of start talking about this a couple of weeks ago, so we're kind of picking up, recapping, moving on, etc., etc., etc. That's the aim for today. No slides. Maybe I'll put something on the board. Maybe the only thing that I'll write on the board is the word power. Let's wait and see. So, kind of where I want to jump off from is just recapping a little bit of what we talked about last time we talked about power, which is to kind of like think a little bit about the nature of power, right? Before we start talking about how it works or how we want to use it, like what actually is it? And I really, really like this quote from David Chapman from his Vividness website, which I think really gives a flavour of it, right? And what he says is, on the one hand, power is the ability to get things done. Without power, it is impossible to accomplish anything. Power makes it possible to benefit others and to change the world for the better. On the other hand, power corrupts. Power is, at best, morally neutral. It can be used for evil as easily as for good. Power is inherently inescapably political. Power inevitably raises strong emotions, both desire and hate. Power is not nice, power is not polite, power is not a comfortable subject to discuss. Many people oppose authority by reflex. Power is a problem, so let's get rid of it. And I think that really sums up a lot of the issues that we have around power, right? As a culture, as individuals, like this really gets to the heart of kind of the challenge. So it's like, how do we work with this thing that it's that we need? It's impossible to get stuff done without power, and yet at the same time, it's, as he says, at best morally neutral. So what do we do with it? Now, when he says many people oppose authority by reflex, power is a problem, so let's get rid of it. Like, what's he talking about there? And I think we know. I think we're familiar with it. He's talking about this. Like what in spiral dynamics we would call green movement. This kind of post-60s, broadly leftist, anti-authoritarian stance that says, like, any exercise of power is a bad thing. There's no just exercise of force. Any exercise of power is a bad thing. And what that leads to is a very consensus-driven approach to doing things, right? We have to deconstruct power, we have to, whenever we see it, we have to take it away, we have to bring everyone into everything. And, that is a very, nice approach, right? It really prizes being nice. And here's the thing, right? We use Holacracy, and Holacracy is not interested in being nice. Holacracy is not a green system. Holacracy is not about deconstructing power. Like, if you read criticisms of Holacracy, like somebody sent me one this week, woohoo, another one. Like, quite often they will say, one of the things about Holacracy is it just doesn't really deconstruct traditional power bases. And you're like, yeah, that might be because that's not what it's aiming to do. Right, Holacracy isn't necessarily interested in doing that. What it is interested in doing is, like, getting shit done. And specifically, Holacracy is really interested in, like, what is the whole system actually about? What is it for? It is for expressing purpose. That is what it is, optimized for. That is what it is all about, is saying, we want to make it more and more possible for people to express purpose. And I'm going to come back to this topic and this theme of expressing purpose. You'll see that it'll come up again later and that it's really important here. Okay, so if Holacracy isn't about being green, right, it's not about being green, it's not about being nice, it's about expressing purpose. Where does that leave us in terms of power, right? If we're rejecting these values that say we should oppose power wherever we see it, what are we doing instead? And the answer, I think, is Holacracy calls us to have a nuanced approach to power, to move beyond a sort of simple reflexive view that power is always either right or wrong, to a stance where we're continually questioning the appropriateness of using power in this circumstance. You know, and the appropriateness of using power within a framework of saying, well, hey, why within this system would we want to use power at all? To get stuff done, to express purpose, right? We're given a way of understanding whether or not it's a good idea to use power. So we move away from a system where we're just always afraid of power to one where instead we're in an ongoing negotiation with it. We have a relationship to power that's this continual dynamic about, is it right here, is it wrong here, like, and it brings a lot of stuff to the surface, right? Holacracy has this desire or this sort of system feature that it brings a lot of stuff to the surface. Like budgets is a great example of this, right? It brings a lot of opposing forces to the surface in a really clear conversation. Like these things don't get hidden. But you know, what I want to talk about a little bit is the sort of mechanisms by which this happens in Holacracy, that we take this nuanced approach. And what Holacracy offers us is checks and balances, like wonderful checks and balances, and it offers us these in a couple of ways, right? And the thing about checks and balances is, like, I think of them a bit like this, right? It's like so sort of like force number one. We want everybody to be able to do anything, as it were, right? Like, because we want to express purpose. We want to give everybody infinite power. But it's like, well, if we give everybody infinite power, does that really work in expressing purpose? Like, if we say to everybody, oh, you can just do anything. Oh, okay, fine. Well, I'll spend £500,000. Oh, well, hang on, no, not that. Right? Checks and balances. So what you need is a counterforce. And I think that this exists a lot in the way that Holacracy works, is that there's a force and there's a counterforce. So this is where we get the sort of surface conflict, is in the meeting of these two forces, but it's right there in the structures that we work with every day. So what's a good example? We, rather than sort of say, okay, we might start out saying like, oh, everybody can do anything, but then the sort of counterforce is like in service of their roles, or within the boundaries of domain and policies. Or we could say, anybody can spend any amount of money unless it would cause harm. Anybody can do any piece of work, unless it would cause harm. And this coming back to the idea of harm and valid objections and so on, I think is really important, because it's this key mechanism for checks and balances. Do you want to? I want to chair. A key place where this shows up, this kind of check and balance mechanism, is in domains in Holacracy. And we touched on this a little bit a couple of weeks ago. Like, one of the ways that we express power is by saying no, right? Is by maintaining or setting a boundary. That's a key thing that power does in our lives. And when using domains, we kind of say no. And there's this sort of lovely dynamic, which is like, we sort of say, well, so let me explain a little bit about how domains work. We think about budgets, like, which is a budgets are domains about spending cash. Let's just say that for now, right? They're also in some ways about spending time, allocating time, but let's just focus on the spending cash aspect for now, right? So the way that if we put a domain around this, we say, okay, like if you want to spend money, right, there's a domain around that. So the way that domains work in Holacracy is, if you say, right, I want to spend money, the default position that Holacracy takes is you can then spend that money, right? So that's the sort of the outward going power, right? We give everybody lots of power. But then the backward force is that you can say, okay, well, no, because. And that's the key thing with a domain, is that the person who is responsible for stewarding that domain, whether it's a role or a circle or whatever, right? But the person or people responsible for stewarding that domain can say no, but they always have to have a reason. They always have to say no because. And then there has to be some way, like some harm that they see. So can you start to see how this is like a more nuanced approach to power than you get in a lot of other ways of running organizations, right? In hierarchy, effectively, your boss can just say no, and they don't have to say because. So in that way, like the fact that you have to say because is a check and balance on the power of the domain holder. The domain holder can't just say no because they feel like it. They actually have to be able to set out a logically reasoned argument. It has to be a valid objection. Yeah? So there's a check and balance on the domain holder, and the domain holder themselves, the existence of the domain, is a check and balance on other people expressing their power in a way that might be damaging, right? So we have this careful balance going on all of the time, and it's never fixed. It's dynamic. That's why I say it's this ongoing negotiation. It's this sort of surface conflict. You know, it's kind of always moving. And you know, similarly, we might say, okay, you know, anybody can do any piece of work. Well, we kind of know that anybody can do anything in service of their roles, right? That's a key thing in Holacracy. Okay, well, does that mean that anybody can do any role? Well, role allocation is also a domain, right? Role allocation, controlled by the lead link. So again, right, you can't just start doing any role, but it's like you can say, I want to do this role, and if the lead link is going to say no, they have to say no because there has to be a reason. So this is a key way that domain holders, lead links around role allocation or budget holders around cash, have to exercise their power, right? They have to maintain that boundary by, like, you're not doing your job properly as a domain holder if you're totally passive and you just let every request pass. But you're also not doing your job properly if you block every request. Every request that comes in, you have to stop and think, okay, like, what is the appropriate use of power in this circumstance? Is it to let this in, or is it to hold this back? Like, what's going on? Like, it puts quite a challenge on domain holders, you know, because it's always going to come up that you're going to have to make these difficult calls. We talked a little bit about spending and about role allocation, and I've mentioned this idea that anyone can do anything in service of their roles. The only exception to that, of course, is in individual action. And I think it's worth clarifying a bit about like what individual action actually is, how it works, because there are some quite strict criteria around individual action. Now, one of the things that we talked about last week, thinking about like the expression of power and what power means, one way of thinking about, you know, given that I've said like there's this relationship between power and boundaries, is everybody comfortable with that idea if I say there's a relationship between power and boundaries, or would it be helpful if I said some more about that? Even if it was going over ground from last time. There is, like it's sort of power is about, kind of the way that I think about it is, it's like, power is about setting and maintaining and kind of filling limits, right? We've talked about this thing about, you know, is it your business or not, around, you know, giving feedback. And setting the limits of, you know, what is my business versus your business is an expression of power, right? Because it's like, this is my space, this is where I get to occupy, these are my limits, you don't get to come in here without my permission. You know, like these, can you see that there's something powerful in saying all of those things? Like just sort of, does it have a sort of an instinctive flavour of power to do that? Right? So partly it's about saying, you know, you don't get to, it's like building, you know, a big wall around your castle, right? That's an act of power. You're saying, you know, no, this is mine. But then there's another way in which power and boundaries are related, which is that, you know, we are, like, what is it that people talk about, like, sort of, like taking up your power or expressing your power or being in your power, like these are sort of buzz phrases that you sometimes hear, right, from me and other people. But, you know, and to me what that's about is like, it's about saying, when you have set a clear limit, really filling out that limit, right? That's you coming into your power. And that's about taking full responsibility. Like, I don't ask you to come in and fill in gaps. Like, once I've set up my wall, I don't ask you to come in inside my wall and fill in gaps that I'm not comfortable with. I recognize that all the space in there is mine, and that therefore living to my fullest is about filling out all the space that's mine. Does that give a bit more flavour about the relationship between power and boundaries? Like, in the sense that it's an act of power to set up and maintain a boundary, but then a boundary is also something that shows power where it's appropriate for it to be expressed. So there's this mutual relationship between them. Does that make sense? Yeah? I was going to talk about individual action. So most of the time, we have to act from roles, right? Whenever we're acting or deciding in Holacracy, we should be doing stuff from within roles. But what about individual action? Okay, the first and most important thing about individual action is that you can only do it once. I mean, not that you only have like one individual action card and then you've played it and then that's it. But I mean, for any given action that you take, if you're taking it outside your roles, if it's something that you're ever going to do again, then you have to update governance. That's one of the rules of individual action, right? You have to, you have to then make sure that there is a role that should do that thing, or if you're going to do it repeatedly, that you are in the role, that it makes sense to do that thing. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, you can never spend money. Individual action never allows you to commit apart from your time, it never allows you to, in the jargon of the Constitution, dispose of resources, which means basically spend cash, but you could see that it could be other stuff as well. They use dispose of resources because maybe it's also like capital, but let's say effectively it means that you can never spend money. And it has to be like the lesser of two evils. That's a sort of less than sign, but it's on a bit of an angle, so it's maybe not super clear. Like, in the sense that taking individual action has to solve more problems than it causes. So if you say, here's this thing, so circumstances where we might take individual action. Like, number one, there isn't a role that's obviously responsible for this at all. This is a totally novel situation, and we've never encountered it before, and therefore, like gardening leave, good example of this, right? We haven't planned for this in any way. Somebody just needs to do something. Great. Okay, fine. Another circumstance is, well, we have planned for this, there is governance around this, there are roles or there are policies or whatever, but for whatever reason, getting hold of, those roles or following those policies is gonna cause harm. Like, there's something that, touch wood, right, but, GDPR, right, we have some kind of data breach, and, it's like, the data protection officer is on holiday or is not here, and we have to take action quickly. Like, some of our client data gets out into the public domain, and it's like, not only have we got to notify the clients and notify the Information Commissioner, we've got to do damage limitation PR very, very quickly to explain how, this is exceptional and this isn't gonna, right? That this is what you have to do, right, in the modern world when you're looking after data. And it's like, okay, we don't actually have time to follow any of the policies here, we just have to act, or, there's this enormous opportunity. Oh, it turns out that there's, this, I don't know, this really interesting client opportunity that's there, but it requires us to act very, very quickly, and we actually don't have time to go through the, right? So, there has to be this clear case where you're causing more harm than good. And then the final thing is, that is a broom, is that you have to tidy up afterwards, right? So if individual action involved you going into an area that's usually somebody else's, like doing stuff that would usually be the responsibility of another role, or you violated a policy or whatever, then you have to make sure that any consequences of you doing that are cleaned up before you do any other work. Right? And it's very clear that if you cause any like mess as a result of doing individual action, you have to tidy up that mess as a priority over anything else that you might be doing for the organisation.
Question then.
Yeah.
So hypothetically, to take individual action, you may need to like break up a policy or like not follow a policy.
Yep.
So what you're talking about is like retrospectively making sure that you've played by the rules of the game.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So if we had a policy that says, well, I'm just trying to think of one, like, when we sign up a new client, and then there are a whole series of things that we have to do, and we're saying, like, we're actually not going to we're not going to work on clients until they're signed up in this way, but for whatever reason, here's this exception, and we're going to work on this client right now, let's say there was a client that, phoned us up on the 30th of, well, not this month, obviously, but because it's February, for future watchers of this video. But let's say somebody phoned us up on the 30th of the month, and they was like, yeah, we've spent £7 million on R&D over the last 2 years, but our year end is tomorrow. And it's like, usually we might say, oh, we won't take people as close to that deadline, and we have a policy that says that we won't sign up clients, that are closer to X to their deadline. We might say, okay, on this circumstance, we're going to do it. And then afterwards, it's like, okay, what did the policy say? Well, the policy said we have to have a properly signed contract in place with the client, and we didn't because we just rushed it, so let's make sure we do that. And so sometimes it's you have to go back and do the things that the policy said that you should have done, or you have to tell the person who would usually have done that you've, yeah, hit me.
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering about, what's the ethos, Holacracy ethos behind this, where, for example, in the gardening example, it wasn't that I spoke to people afterwards, and that wouldn't have been their course of action. So if someone doesn't agree with it, not everyone's going to agree that the individual action is the right action. Does the Holacracy system just kind of extend that trust to people that when things need to happen, perhaps some people get it right sometimes they don't?
Yeah. So this then comes down to, so sort of philosophically, this is like our principle that anyone can do anything in service of their roles. And then individual action is an exception in which we say, we can sometimes act out of roles as long as, you still have to be serving the purpose of the organisation, right? So individual action is, you can act outside of your roles in service of the purpose of the organisation. So the condition is, under individual action, anybody can do anything in service of the purpose of the organisation, provided it's the lesser of two evils to be acting outside roles. And just as when we're acting from roles, like anyone can do anything in service of their role. Like if you say, look, I sincerely believe that this action is in service of my role, then you're allowed to do it, right? Nobody, and if other people say, well, I don't think that's in service of your roles, then we're sort of coming back to our nuanced approach to power. It's like when we were talking about, you say to your boss, can I spend this money on this thing? And your boss is just entitled to say no and have no reason. That doesn't exist in Holacracy. No one can ever say to you, as it were, no, without a reason. So that also means that when we're taking individual action, like other people might say, oh, when we're acting from our roles, other people might say, yeah, I don't really think that was a good thing to do. I don't think that really served the purpose of your role accurately. And unless there's a reason, unless they can say like, because, here's this thing in writing, right? You can say, well, you're entitled to your opinion and I'm entitled to my opinion. Does that make sense?
Kind of going back to the objection structure in the governance meeting framework, as in, is it valid?
Yeah, so we use the objection structure, like, is it a valid objection when we want to go into domains, but, as long as we're not crossing over the boundaries of any domains, and, let's sort of say, like, let's imagine it's like a sort of twin town, like, Budapest, that there's like domains policies, one on each bank of a river, because they're sort of like, this is my classic writing on the board, like I'm not a proper teacher because I'd be able to just right at an angle, but they're really closely interlinked. So sort of when we're talking about domains, we're sort of kind of talking about policies as well. But it's in some ways it's simpler if we say domains. Like the whole thing about
I was just going to say, in terms of like going back to the example that you used, in terms of like there being a policy, for example, of not bringing on a client in a certain window, what are we saying here that if we did bring in someone, because for example, like in sales, it's not actually that person that has to go and deliver that work. We're basically saying that they bring them in with that good intention, kind of explain it, but then they hold the work until they find somebody who is able to take it on, and if not, they then have to solve the problem of letting the client down. Is that kind of what we're saying?
Yes.
Because that's where work has sometimes just been, hit across, and then it's not my problem, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. I took individual action. I violated the policy that says, when we sign clients up, we do these things. Like I did something that was like outside the rules of the game. That means that I'm responsible for doing any tidying up. Yeah, like that, and that includes if what comes back is, well, actually the reason that rule existed is because we're not actually capable of doing that thing. Then yes, I would say that it was down to you to tidy that up and to see, oh yeah, okay, fine, I'll have to go back to it. Yeah, that sounds right to me.
Is there a rule on communicating individual action like before it happens? So to say to give the example of a data breach and the respective role not being on holiday or not being available, is it required to give some disclosure and say, this has happened, this person is not here, I am taking individual action?
Let's have a look. Off the top of my head.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I read it. I think you have to make it public what you're doing.
I can go and look at that if you don't want to waste time.
Communication and restoration. Upon taking individual action, you have a duty to explain your action and the intent behind it to any partner who fills a role that may be significantly impacted. And upon request of those partners, you have a duty to take any reasonable actions to assist in resolving any tensions created by your individual action, which is the tidying up. So you don't have to just tell everybody, but you do have to tell the roles that are affected.
So when you talk about that as you directly link that to the tidying up, I'm asking if that's something which is required before the action is even taken.
What, to tell people?
Yeah, to say this is what I am about to do.
No, there's nothing here that says that.
Interesting. Okay.
No, there's nothing that specifically says that. Individual action versus roles. Oh, we were talking about, yeah. So I was saying this thing about as long as we're, here's the space that we're playing in, and a few things are in domains. Okay, well, as long as we're in this space here between domains, we can just do whatever we want in service of our roles, right? If we genuinely think, yeah, this is in service of my role, we can do it, and there are no one can say, oh, I have an objection, or this would cause harm, or blah 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 blah. None of your business, right? If I'm acting in this space, right? Now, as soon as I say, well, I'm going to cross over into here, or cross over into here, that request for crossing, you can say no because it would cause harm, because I have an objection. But this idea that we can do anything in service of the purpose of our roles is very much about in the space that exists, around defined domains. Now, this is one of these things about Holacracy where it's is it a bit Byzantine? Is it a bit bureaucratic? Is it a bit complex? And in some ways, yes, it is, right? But I want to maybe just sort of draw an idea about why it is, and that it's Holacracy is sort of like a system of law, right? Now, law for those of you who've read *Sapiens*, it's Anyway, it's very interesting. The narrative style I'm finding a little bit trying, but it's still an interesting book. And one of the things that he explains so elegantly is this idea that law is a myth. In the sense that it's yeah, exactly. It's something that we've invented. It's something fiction. Abstract. Fiction or a myth, or I think I can use fiction and myth interchangeably. But why do we have law? Like, why does this exist? And the answer is because it allows us to coordinate human action on a larger scale than would otherwise be possible. Without the existence of, one of the whole thrusts of *Sapiens* is this idea that without the existence of myths or fictions, we wouldn't be able to, human society would look like, other, like higher primate societies. We would exist in small bands that lived independently of each other. But the fact is, as human beings, we don't do this. We live in this massive, globalized society.
Would they be self-managing those?
No. I would say that they, maybe it would tend, but like you think about it, no, they have very clear like power structures, like many of them, don't they? Like, gorillas and, chimps have quite clearly defined power structures, and a lot of their time is spent on maintaining those power structures. Anyway. So we have laws so that we can coordinate action on human action on a larger scale than we would otherwise be able to. And that's kind of what Holacracy exists to do. It exists to allow us to scale a very free, very open, sort of, individually creative way of working into a large team, into a scale that's larger than would otherwise work. So, an alternative approach to self-management, which is very popular at the moment, it's one of the things that people talk about, is what's sort of sometimes trendily called like podular teams, but it's a bit like the Birdsong approach, right? We've talked about Birdsong before, the idea that the way that they work is that they have these teams of 12. Everything is built around these independent teams of 12. And, this sort of pod approach is also built around the idea that you have, a team of 12 that's then nested into 12 teams of 12, 144, which is, like very close to sort of Dunbar's number of, the largest number of people that we can hold in our head and have relationships with, and then 12 teams of, and then 12 units of those 144s is about 1,500, which is about the size of a battalion, or the sort of size of a largest sort of division in most companies. So these numbers just sort of fall out again and again and again in human groupings. But this pod approach is different and says, within the context of the pod, we don't necessarily need, this system of law, this system of written rules, because within a group that small, we can just maintain an awareness, it's this idea of, the 12 disciples or whatever, like when you can sit around a table and maintain eye contact with anyone, when your office can just be like, genuinely one big desk, then you're sort of in touch with everybody and what they're doing in like a relatively easy, passive way. And so, everything can just be negotiated on the fly. We don't necessarily need to put structure around it. So one approach to scaling from there is to have this idea of sort of nested pods that report into these sort of superpods and things like that. But then, Holacracy is another way of doing that, and it does it by saying, well, now that we're trying to scale this onto a bigger level than it will just work automatically, we need to have a system of law. Now, there is a pitfall to that approach, which is, like the Constitution game. Is that what it's called then, the Constitution game? Like, this... Well, anyway, it's this, you'll remember as I describe it, but this...
I don't remember what it's called.
Diplomacy.
No, it's a game where you start with a dozen immutable laws and a dozen mutable laws, and each round you can propose a change to the laws. to the mutable roles, except one of the mutable roles also that there are some immutable roles. So basically you can rewrite the rules of the game as you go along. So you start with the rule set of how you win the game, but then you rewrite the game as you go along, and it was created by a lawyer, of course, to prove that any system of law, no matter how deterministic it starts out looking, if you allow it to change itself, it will devolve into endless arguments about what laws mean what, and it's like it always devolves that.
Right. So there's sort of, there's like some entropy in the system, right? The system is just going to get ever more diffuse and ever more complex. And so that is like, if you take the Holacracy approach, that is a force. I mean, it's a pitfall that I fall into all the time, but it's like, is the system just getting more and more complex as it sort of expands outwards? Does there need to be accounted for? I think that the solution to that is to have an awareness of the fact that that is a pitfall of these kind of rule-based systems, and to therefore say, oh yeah, let's come back to the rules and revisit them and say, do they need to be simplified? Do we still need this rule, on a regular basis? Like, the Constitution doesn't call us to do that, but that doesn't mean that it isn't good discipline to come back and say, yeah, we created this in the past. Is it actually still serving us to have this role, to have this policy? Like, does it actually do anything? What happens if I delete it? Does anybody care? Like, oh, some people care. Okay, so maybe it is still doing something. I didn't think it was. What else did I want to say? So talking a little bit about power, talking about the fact that, Holacracy is not about being nice, but it's about expressing purpose. And so when we say that you can do anything in service of your role, like, our aim is very much to say that we want it to be much easier here to do the things that you need to do to express the purpose of your work than it is in other organizations. And the thing about saying, like, express the purpose of your work, like, hierarchy of purpose, right? Hierarchy of purpose. So, what's this telling me? Oh, 20%, that's absolutely fine. This is how purpose is really key, right? Whole of Holacracy is about expressing purpose. The point of defining roles is that we are supposed to be, as it were, sort of like, oh, it's the sound of an aeroplane coming through the, that's fascinating. That we're supposed to be, sort of chunking up the purpose of the organization into, like little packets. Like so you should, when you're acting from a role, which we're doing almost all of the time, like 95% or more of the time, except when we're doing individual action, we're acting from a role. We shouldn't need to refer to any purpose at a level of hierarchy higher than the role that we're acting from at that point in time, right? So when I'm acting from a role, it shouldn't matter to me what the purpose of my circle is, because the purpose of my role should contain a portion of the purpose of the circle. Do you see what I'm saying? So, yeah, the purpose of my role should contain the purpose of the circle. Now, I get that we don't always do that, because like, we're just like, oh, quick, create a role, yeah, this will be fine, blah, blah, blah. But so this is one of the things that it's worth coming back to, is it's like, oh, like, do I actually do, like, if I'm the lead link, right, the lead link has an accountability to ensure that the purpose of the circle is properly expressed in the governance of the circle, right? So, and of course anybody can do this, but the lead link has an accountability, so we can expect it of the holder of that role. And to me that includes going through and saying, okay, let's just like step back and review, like, do the purposes of the roles in this circle really feel like they're breaking down the purpose of the circle such that anyone who is acting in service of their purpose of their role could do that without actually having to refer to the purpose of the circle or the purpose of the organisation, and be confident that they were serving both, of those things. You know, that audit is switchboard. Yeah, that audit kind of seems to me to be something worth doing. Like, and this is what I'm calling, you know, the year of purpose. The year of purpose, of which, of course, the patron saint is, you know, Saint Justin of Bieber. But you know, actually going through and saying like, oh yeah, like this is how it's supposed to work. Like we're supposed to be able to serve the purpose of our roles. Like actually going through and saying, are the purposes of the roles really robust? Like is that actually working? So the system is about saying when we are expressing purpose, when we are acting from the purpose of our roles or in an interaction purpose of the organisation. Yeah, that we have a lot of freedom, we have a lot of power to express ourselves as long as we're not going into the space that's delimited by you know, a domain policy. Do I want to? Yeah. So when we're acting from roles, we have a lot of power, and you know I touched on this a bit last time, but I just wanted to bring it in again this week, which is that includes saying no. Right, maintaining our boundary. That includes saying, that's not part of my role. And actually that's a really important thing that Holacracy asks you to do, is to be like, you know, maintain the boundaries of your role. You know, it really asks you to take up your power. Don't like allow things to come into your role that don't really belong to your role. Yeah, I don't think this is really a role, but could you help me with this? No. You know, like Holacracy sort of really asks you to say no to that. And then another way in which we like get power from our roles is in the sort of like almost the kind of flip side of this saying no is it's like, you know, which roles are involved here? Like who is it that should be saying yes effectively? You know, and when we talk about those two tools, right, saying no and getting clarity, like asking which roles are involved, are really key ways that Holacracy gives everybody power that I think is what allows us to navigate, you know, like implicit hierarchy. When we find that there's a power structure that we're meeting that isn't the explicit power structure of Holacracy, like actually saying, you know, either no, it's not my role, like maybe you hold some sort of explicit power over me, some sort of implicit power over me, but actually this isn't my role, so I'm not going to do it. Or the flip side of that, like, what role are you actually making this request from? Like, if we get clear about the roles involved and we maintain the boundaries of the roles that we hold, that gives us an enormous ability to repel, you know, unauthorized power, right? So in that way, Holacracy is like, so this kind of brings us back, right, full circle to this idea of green and, you know, is Holacracy about deconstructing traditional relationships of power? Well, in a sense, it is. Like, it's not saying that all power, that all autocratic power is wrong, but it's saying only legally authorized autocratic power is okay. Like, power that exists outside of the explicit system is not okay, and the system actually contains tools within it. It gives you tools to repel the exercise of power that doesn't come from within the system of law that contains, you know, all of these many checks and balances, right? Okay, I think that's everything that I want to say. So let me turn over the floor to questions and discussions.
I'd like to make a point there that
And points.
Yeah, I'd like to make a point that the reason why Karin and I signed the Holacracy Constitution because we want to deconstruct this implicit hierarchy, and we're also human, and sometimes we're going to use this implicit hierarchy without even really realizing that we do. And so I want to make it really explicit that whenever I do that, please feel absolutely welcome to tell me what role are you actually acting for. You actually have the authority to ask me to do this. Like, push back. I'm never going to get upset at somebody for pushing back, for saying like, no, I want to clarify how this fits into the Holacracy system. And I suspect that's the case for everybody else here as well, but like I can only make the statement for myself that I'm totally open to that kind of pushback, and I really welcome it. In fact, it makes me quite happy to see that kind of pushback. So that's the point I want to make.
Cool, thank you.
It's kind of a question, but maybe linked to an observation as well, in terms of talking about like power and having roles with very clear defined purposes. Like it's definitely the case with sales that a lot of roles have accountabilities but not clearly stated purposes. And I'm thinking in terms of when people are maybe talking to other people out in different circles, if you don't have a purpose is obviously something much wider spread, whereas accountabilities are much more based on like deliverables for you to do as a person. So it almost looks like if you don't have a purpose for a role, you're in a weak position when trying to like serve the bigger purpose of that role. Basically, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I think you are. Like, you know, the purpose is really like the way that I think about writing a purpose is it's like the perfection statement. Like maybe we can never get to this, but like, you know, when this role is perfected, what does it look like? And the accountabilities is just like the things that we expect to be done to further that. You know, like things that other people expect of us. But yeah, like purpose is, you know, like really strong. And when there isn't a purpose on a role, it's like people start to, like we introduce, I mean, you know, maybe that level of ambiguity is okay, right? Maybe it isn't causing problems, but it definitely introduces ambiguity in that my view of what this role is for and your view of what this role is for might be quite different. And in particular, like it comes down to things like, you know, the names of roles don't really necessarily tell you what they're for. Like you might discover, like, you know, you might think, oh, this is what, you know, finance is for, right? But then you look at the purpose of finance and you think, oh no, actually no, I was wrong. Like that's the thing that it's for in lots of organizations, but actually here it's for this. So yeah. Anybody else? No? No? Is that...
We had the interesting conversation about, oh, this might be a little bit different though. The difference between the roles and people carrying out the roles, and how do we deal with the pieces of work that affect the people rather than the role, like for example, a salary, and how can we find a way or a hack around that, kind of with the home planner and the saplings. Is that like a required hack, or is that it's us still finding a way?
Yeah, it's kind of us finding a way, right? Like Holacracy doesn't concern itself with people. It concerns itself with work, with roles, with, you know, like purpose. So, you know, maybe there are roles that care about pay in the sense that, you know, like they have domains or, you know, they're impacted in some way. Yeah, Holacracy, like, you know, as it comes off the shelf, says, oh yeah, like, you know, your pay as a person, that's not something that we're really concerned with. So the sapling role, yes, is a bit of a hack to allow us to say, you know, can we set some governance around that, or can we sort of like hack the governance mechanism to allow there to be, to give people the power to set and change and be held accountable by rules. Like I think that we did, like, you know, one of the things that, you know, we were talking about this yesterday with Boas when we were talking to them about, you know, the scaling and culture and things like that. You know, the pay model, really, we only get to stress test it once a year in the pay review, like sort of, you know, out of sequence pay reviews test it a little bit, but it really only gets fully tested, like how robust is this, how well does this work, once a year. Like once a year and in a high pressure situation, and then we have, you know, like, oh, okay, what changes do we need to make, what isn't working? And, you know, one of the things that's sort of clear to me this year is it's actually like the pay system is not very well encoded in governance, And we could do that better, right? We could make it clearer, like, oh, what are the roles, what are the domains, what do you have to do, what are the actual rules that you have to follow, and what are the things that are guidance. Like, it would be nice to have that kind of level of clarity. And I think for me, the clarity that I most want to see in governance is about feedback. Like, when feedback comes in this process, which feedback is coming from roles, and which feedback is person to person. You know, remembering that when it comes to person feedback, we can always say thanks but no thanks. But feedback from a role is different. There's actually some authorized power being exercised there, and yeah, structuring that so that the right roles are in the right places to talk to each other within, you know, valid governance is a little bit of a technical exercise, but I think it's worth doing for next year.
Do you know when we spoke about previously about giving sometimes like people's opinions and advice on things which aren't your domain or within your circle serving the purpose, and we said that we had to specifically request whether that person wanted to receive it. If we're coming in it from a role because we're seeing something with a knock-on effect that impacts our circle, are we able to deliver that feedback? Like, do we have to ask, is what I'm kind of saying? Or
no, from a role, you have a right to act. You know,
okay.
like and it's specifically here. Like, it's right in the rule book, and it's sort of really near the top. I think it's.
I could just add a bit of subtlety there. You have a right to. That doesn't mean you have to do it right away. It's like often, like for example, I might give feedback to Palina. She might not be in the right state to receive it. I ask, like, are you okay if I give you feedback now? If she says no, and it's feedback that I need to give her, then at some point later that day, I will give her that feedback. But you know, you can give some flexibility as to don't want the feedback right now while I'm walking to the toilet, for example, or you know, can you wait an hour or something.
Yeah, but the point is someone can't go, like if you're saying I'm coming in it from this point of view, somebody can't just pine off and say, no, you're interfering basically.
Yeah, and keep saying, no, I don't want to hear your feedback and stuff. No, sorry, like this is feedback from my role, it's about the work that we're doing, I need to give you this feedback, it's not optional.
But do we have to give any description of the way in which it's damaging our work, maybe, so that person can feel that before they take it, or?
So, you have a duty to process tensions that are brought to you by other roles in your circle. That's the sort of constitutional deal, right? So, the way that tensions can be brought to you to process is in the form of requests for outcomes, like, please take on a project, please take on an action to achieve this thing from this role, it fits with this role, so please take it on. And people can point out to you, like, and you know, you can always be called to account to comply with existing governance, you know? So, you know, there's actually, like, there actually already exists a policy around this, or there exists a domain around this, or there exists a circle strategy around this that you're not currently complying with it, so please do it. Like, you're acting with quite a lot of power and authority when you're calling on those things, right? Does that make sense? People with me? So, you can ask to other people to process tensions from your role by saying, please take on this action, or please achieve this outcome. But, you know, if what you're saying is you doing this thing negatively impacts my work, like if you do this thing, then this stops me being able to do this stuff, then I think from your role you can say that sort of informally, but other people can say, oh yeah, I see that me doing this thing negatively impacts your stuff, but I'm not bothered and I'm going to keep doing it. Well, then you have a right to process that tension in governance to say, okay, well, this thing can't happen in this way, otherwise my work can't happen, so, you know, like, I have a tension. Great, I'm going to create a policy. You know, we're going to, like, put some rules around that. So you can always call people to account in terms of saying, you know, please comply with existing rules. You can ask the other people to take on outcomes, or if people are acting in a way that is complying with existing rules, but is, like, negatively impacting your work, then you have a valid governance tension, which means that you can change the rules. And you know, it still might mean that actually just having an informal conversation and saying, it would be better if you did this thing this way rather than this way, is a quicker fix, And so you can always just go and do that, right? Holacracy doesn't say, do things in the most difficult way you possibly can at all times. Right? So if there's a quick and easy way to do it, then do it. But, you know, I think that from the role, I would say, my view is that yes, you have a right to speak, but if the other person says, oh, yeah, okay, well, I am actually complying with the existing rules. Okay, well, we'll have to change the rules, you know. Make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah. I think it's just that interesting way in which people navigate it. Like there's kind of the human side of trying to talk things through, and then that seems to me to sound like a bit of a dick move in terms of just like, okay, you're not liking this, I'm going to go in first and just change it so it suits me, and then it's kind of your
my role, you mean? Like
from a role, it's
yeah.
so it's my problem.
Yeah, well, this is it. Like, you know, it's a dick move because it's exercising autocratic power. Like, but Holacracy is not opposed to exercising autocratic power. Holacracy is opposed to purpose not being as fully expressed as it can. You know? So this is what this whole power subject is about, is that sometimes we have to do these things where like, yeah, sorry, it's a bit uncomfortable, but I'm gonna have to, like, you know, what was that, you know, what it comes back to the David Chapman quote, right? You know, power is the ability to get things done. Without power, it's impossible to accomplish anything. On the other hand, power corrupts, it's at best morally neutral, it can be used for evil as easily as good. It's inherently and inescapably political, inevitably raises strong emotions, it's not nice, it's not polite, and it's not a comfortable subject to discuss. You know? These are inherent features of power, so it's like, yeah, it's a bit of a dick move, because it's the use of power, but hey, it's in service of the expression of purpose, more fully. Feels like a good place to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you.